All right, so let's get into it. We've been gone for a long minute. We had a lot of motion going on, a lot going on, real busy, but just came back because we about to tackle this. Lately it's been a lot of people getting real overboard with this Gullah Geechees or some type of African group that's been there isolated on that island and preserved their African culture, and they're so African all of a sudden this and that. We about to get into all that. We're gonna explain about where does all that come from, and how that's a bunch of BS, and it basically is the Pan Africanization of Black Americans. So first we're gonna start right here. This is the Gullah Geechee region. It starts up here along the coast of North Carolina, goes all the way through South Carolina, through Georgia, and Florida. This is basically the southeastern coast. Now, let's get into some of this Pan Africanization stuff of the Gullah Geechee people that a lot of people are saying. Now, again, I'm not saying that the Gullah Geechee people don't have African DNA, because they very much so do. But a lot of people are going overboard to say that, act like they some type of isolated group, like they like the Andamis people in on the Indian coast, like they've just been there for thousands of years, uncontacted. No, the Gullah Geechee people are regular Black Americans. They haven't really preserved much of any African culture. Well, maybe a couple things here and there, but most of all of this stuff is recent. This heavy Pan Africanization stuff of the Gullah Geechee people is very new and very recent. And we're going to get into it. Let's hear some of the claims.
We think Gullah came from the word Gola. The Gola tribe were rice growing people in West.
He said he thinks that the word Gullah comes from the Gullah people. Now, let's tackle that. So this is where some people get this. Some people get this stuff from. They believe that kingdom formerly of Angola, formerly known as Nyango, was ruled by a monarch with the title of Angola, and they think that that's where they think that they came here. Well, there were some people that came to the port of Charleston as slaves, but they're trying to say here that the name Gullah comes from the this word Gola, in which it does not. Here you see circled here the Guale people, the Gola people. Now, I'm not a Muskegee, I'm not a Creek, so I don't know the correct way to pronounce this. This could be pronounced Guale, Gule, Guli, who knows? But you see the word here, right here. So, when did the first map appear with the word Gullah in it in Carolina? Based on colonial mappings of American Southeast, detailed maps identifying the Guale region is in proximity to the developing Carolina colony began appearing in the late 17th and 18th century. So this word was already on maps in the early 17th and 18th centuries. Now, if it comes from the word Angola, then that would mean that the Angola slaves from Africa would have had to have already been heavily present there in Charleston or South Carolina. Here it says there was no heavy influx of enslaved people from Angola to Charleston. It occurred, well, it really didn't occur to the late 1730s. So there's a time gap. If the word Gullah comes from them, and they didn't even start getting here until about 102 years later after it was already cited on the map, then how does the word Gullah come from the Angola people? It's not making any sense. Now, let's ask ChatGPT what ChatGPT thinks. Is the name of the region Gullah come from the native word Gullah or from Angola? Give me a non-biased answer. This is a good question. And the honest answer is there's no absolute proof either way, because who can really know, of course? Here's a breakdown. Theory 1. Gullah was a native chieftain in coastal Georgia. It's documented by the Spanish in the 1500s. So this word, Gullah, was documented by the Spanish in the 1500s. The Angolan slaves didn't start coming to Charleston until about 1730. Please make that make sense. Why this theory holds weight: geographic overlap, colonial name patterns. Okay, now let's go to theory two. Is it from Angola? Many enslaved Africans in South Carolina came from West Central Africa, especially modern Angola. Angola, shortened Gola or Gullah. Why this theory exists: high number of captives from Angola region in the 1700s. What do most linguistics say? Most modern historical linguistics lean towards Gullah more likely derives from Guale. Reasons: Guale predates heavy Angolan slave imports. The region already had the name in colonial records. Gullah is more linguistically straightforward than Angola, meaning Gullah. However, there is no written document that explicitly states the origin, of course. But like they said, most historical linguistics are going to lean towards the word having the indigenous name of the Guale indigenous people. What is the origin of the name Ogeechee River? Because now that we've debunked where the word Gullah comes from, that it's a indigenous word, where does the last part Geechee come from? The name Ogeechee River originates from the Muskegee Creek Indian term for River of the Uchis, referring to the Uchee tribe that inhabited that area. So there you have it. The Gullah and the Geechee are both indigenous words that predate the Angolan slaves coming here. Now, let's get into this. Now, because the Gullah Geechee people are not 100% isolated, some 100% isolated African tribe, they are regular Black Americans who have had an ethnogenesis, who have mixed with indigenous or have mixed with Native Americans and white people, just like all other Black Americans. Like they have an ethnogenesis just like you. The two groups have merged together to create their culture. Now, here, this is where a lot of people is gonna make y'all mad because y'all really think that the Gullah Geechee people are 100% African, some type of uncontacted, uncharted group, which is false. Now, this is from a 2001 study. I'll let y'all look at this link and read all of that on your own time. But let's get to the juice. We observed that the Gullah and the JHS African Americans had slightly higher Native American ancestry, than such and such had been reported in most African American groups in the US. So this right here dispels the myth that the Gullah Geechee people are some 100% uncontacted African group. Yes, they do have a heavy African presence. I'm sure they do. But those people are also mixed, just like all other Black Americans. And you all can read this study on your own. Now, here, to add on to a lot of the Gullah Geechee people and people, especially in the state of South Carolina, being of mixed indigenous or Native American and let's say Negro Black heritage, where does the term red bone come from? A lot of times here we say, oh, she a red bone, this and that. A red bone really is not just a light skinned girl. A red bone is a high yellow girl with like red lips, red kneecaps. That's a real red bone. But where does the real term red bone come from? In South Carolina and broader US, red bone historically refers to a person of mixed racial ancestry, often combining white, Black, and Native American heritage. Here's another article. Here's an article from 1896. This is a man talking about some red bones in South Carolina. These people are known as free Negroes, also old issues, but as I said above, the correct name is red bone. I will try to give the reader a clear meaning according to my understanding of this word also is used, which is this. The word red bone is and should be used to designate those mixed breed people who as a race were never slaves, although they may have Negro blood, and who have or are supposed to have Indian blood. If my understanding of the name Redbone is correct, and this mixed breed, isolated people in the privateer township, that's in South Carolina, can't be classed as Redbones, then what are they? As a people, they are a combination of white, the Negro, and Indian races. Who does that sound like? Black Americans, because that's what we are under our ethnogenesis. From the best accounts, there are at present 70 and 80 of these people in this township. That's in that little small township alone. And then he goes on to give the names, and you all can read this article for yourself. I'll let y'all read that article yourself. If y'all need the source, you can just hit me up. A Red Bone celebration. On Saturday, our correspondents had the pleasure of attending the celebration. It was held by that of a unique, interesting, and mixed breed of people of the township, some of whom lived just below the county line, mistakenly called free Negroes, but whose right name is Red Bones. They are really a race apart to themselves. Their Indian blood and the fact that they were never in slavery makes them an entirely distinct race from the old time free Negroes proper. You all read the rest of that on your own time. If y'all need that source, you can just message me or whatever. Now let's get into some more racial terms in the state of South Carolina. What does the term musty mean in South Carolina when referring to a race? In colonial South Carolina, musty generally referred to a person of mixed African and Native American ancestry, often the child of a white person and a quadroon or octoroon. It was a racial classification used in the 18th century to describe individuals with 1/8 black blood or to denote mixed race individuals. Geechee people are purely Africans. They don't have any indigenous blood. They don't have any Native American blood in them, right? Well, I've already been showing y'all in the past few slides. Now, here's more. 1748. This is an article for a runaway slave. A runaway in his 20s from Silas Pervin, however you pronounce it. He's a very lusty Negro man named Samson. He has some mixture of Indian blood in him. He was born of an Indian woman and looks much like an Indian, only his hair. Meaning, basically, he looks like a black Negro, but his hair looks Indian. Now, who does that remind you of? Here's another article. Here's another article about mestizos. Now these are South Carolina terms. Now I know mestizo that was used in Mexico to describe indigenous people mixed with Spaniard, but in South Carolina apparently it meant something different. These are several communities of white, Indian, Negro hybrids in South Carolina, the members of which do not fit into any biracial caste system. These outcasts insist that they are white, and they claim the privileges and courtesies of white people. Some of them, if pressed, will not deny the strain of Indian, though they take no pride in the fact, and most of them are offended even at the suggestion. Even at the suggestion. The dominant whites, on the other hand, are convinced. The dominant whites, on the other hand, are convinced that there is a trace of Negro blood in them, and on the theory that one drop of Negro blood makes one a Negro. They are reluctant to accept them and regard them their claim to white status as various mixed emotions. Now here they have other names for these people: uh, musties, red bones, brass ankles, that they would call a lot of these people. Here's another one. Here's another runaway slave ad. Jackson is a musty, about 17 or 18 years old. From the 1730s through the 1780s, newspaper ads proclaimed that 2,424 slaves had ran away from their masters in South Carolina and noted 27% of their ads, a surprisingly 37% of runaways were described as being light, yellow, or mulatto in appearance, and 19% of them were said to be musty. The cultural influences of the Native Americans are reflected in Gullah crafts, colonial wear, boat building techniques, and decorations of healing herbs used to cope with illness. This is where hoodoo comes from. For those of you who don't know what hoodoo, don't get it confused with voodoo. This is where hoodoo comes. Further support for Native American admixture in the South comes from several socially distinct communities with European, African, American, and Indian ancestry that have persisted to this present day. Brass ankles and Turks in South Carolina. Here you have it, a runaway slave. 1768, a musty fellow called Jacob, 19 years of age, about 5 feet 6 inches high. Here's another one. Lodged at the Charleston workhouse as a runaway, Bill, who says he belongs to those Judkins of Warren County, North Carolina. Bill is a mustee, about 21 through 22 years old of age. Slave ad. Will we be given for the apprehension and delivery of master of workhouse of a fellow man named Ned. Ned is of dark brown complexion, or what is called musty. Here's another one. Jackson is a musty, about 17 to 18 years old, short and well made, quick, active, and intelligent, and has one front tooth a little worn. Had a little dirty tooth in the front. Here's another one. This one is a little bit hard to read because of his age, but let's see what we can get out of it. Right here. A very likely musty boy about 11 years old. Runaway from the subscriber about the middle of August last. A musty fellow by the name of Charles. This country born about 26 years of age. So there y'all have it for that. So here we basically have just debunked the fact that right here that so many of these Gullah Geechee people are 100% some type of uncontacted, uncharted African tribe. That's false. They are mixed with Native American or Indigenous American and white, just like all other Black Americans. They are not uncontacted, and their culture is not solely African. Their culture is a mixture of African and indigenous cultures. Now we're gonna bring it back up to present day. For those of you, I lived in multiple parts of Georgia and went to South Carolina a lot of times, so I know about the Gullah Geechee festivals. Now, a lot of time, what y'all see on social media about the Gullah Geechee festivals, you'll see a bunch of Pan-African flags, people walking around dressed in kente cloths and screaming "Ase" and all this other African stuff. I'm gonna tell y'all who those come from. Those are not the normal or original Gullah Geechee festivals. First off, so is there more than one Gullah Geechee festival in South Carolina? There's many. There's the original Gullah Geechee festival in Beaufort. Then there's the Hilton Head Gullah Geechee celebration. There's the Penn Center Heritage Days, one in St. Island. There's the Atlantic Beach Gullah Geechee Culture and Nature Festival, Gullah Geechee Bahamian Creole Festival. This is one of the newer ones. And there's many more, basically. But we're going to talk about the main and original ones and what they mean, because we're about to break it down. All of this Pan-Africanization of Gullah Geechee people is new and recent. This started around the year 2000 or late 2000s. Before that, none of all this Pan-African stuff, walking around in kente cloths and saying "Ase" and Pan-African flags, none of this was part of the Gullah Geechee culture before all of this Pan-Africanization came from the top. The Gullah Geechee Festival was established to honor and recreate the atmosphere of a celebration called Decoration Day, now named Memorial Day. So the Gullah Geechee Festival was not about celebrating some African heritage or about being from Africa. It was all a celebration of Memorial Day. One day in 1985, 5 women gathered and reminiscing about the days when the Black community would celebrate Decoration Day in Beaufort, South Carolina. Those women were Miss Rosalie Peasant, her daughters. I'll let you read her names here. The ladies decided that they should plan their own event in which they could keep the same old time flavor as Decoration Day while expanding on their new ideas, including incorporating entertainment they selected. They tossed around several names, finally came up with the name representative of the area, and decided to call their new ventures the Gullah Festival. Under the helm of Mrs. Peasant, their dream became reality, and their first year of the festival was in 1986. Now, here you have the founder of the original Gullah Geechee Festival, Mrs. Peasant, right here. This is her right here, draped in the American flag. The creator and originator of the Gullah Geechee Festival, Miss Peasant, right here with the American flag around her shoulders, draped in the American flag, not a Pan African flag, not an Angolan flag, not no kente cloths, no fucking crown around her head or weird necklaces, just a regular black American grandmother or woman here draped in the American flag, because the original Gullah Geechee Festival was not to represent African heritage or anything. It was just to celebrate Memorial Day. And here's a clipping right here of Miss Pat's family, Miss Patton's family. These are some of her nieces. And they talking about when they first started it. There's no mention of the festival being to celebrate their African heritage or nothing like that. There's no talk of that. Y'all can watch this video for yourselves. This is one of the other Gullah Geechee festivals on Hilton Head. One of the other ones. Nothing in here about African culture. This is another one at the Penn Center at the this is at St. Helena. As you see, nothing about African culture. Not saying again, not saying that they didn't originate from Africa, but these are Black Americans. We have had an ethnogenesis. We've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years now. This connection to Africa is basically pretty much all wiped out. We created our own culture right here on this land where basically we are indigenous to this land. Seeing as how we're a brand new race that was created through ethnogenesis, that would make us indigenous to this land. Technically, wouldn't it? I'll let you do the math. I'll let you ponder about that. The Atlantic Beach Gullah Geechee Cultural and Natural Festival. This is the one held in Atlantic Beach. What city is this? This is another one of the. Now, most of these, in which you'll see a lot of these, has been co-opted by this woman known as Queen Quet. Now, this woman, I'm sure anytime you type in something that got to do with Gullah Geechee, this strange woman will pop up. This woman is from New York. This woman is not even from South Carolina. She's basically a Hotepper. If you look, you see the Ankh cross, which is that's some high level Hotepetry. Whenever they got that, she has some weird copper earrings with crystals in them. Some type of shell headband. This is a real Hotep. Here she's dressed in some type of kente African cloth with another Hotep necklace. The woman. Now, I'm not saying that the woman might not be doing some good work, but the woman is very strange. She's from New York. If you listen to her talk, she does not talk with a South Carolina accent. She has a very strong New York accent. If you have any brain cells, and you could hear that. Here you see, just kind of strange, walking with a stick with crystals or rocks on them. So people from New York from this time, when she came down in 2000, this is when the whole temperature was at an all-time high in places like New York. So apparently she came down to South Carolina for whatever reason, it started spreading and started co-opting this Hotepetry and Pan-Africanism into the Gullah Geechee cultures and festivals in South Carolina. Uh, they said she would like pour out libations on stage, and she would always be saying "Ase," which "Ase" is that's a Yoruba word, might I add. Now, y'all say that the Gullah Geechees are Angolan and this and that, but Asi is a Yoruba word. So if there's such a uncontacted Angolan tribe, then why is some woman from New York in 2000s coming talking about Ase? So, and again, this woman wears kente cloth. Any type of person who dresses like this basically has some type of Afrocentric Pan African ideology. Because as a Black American, our elders, our mothers, our grandmothers don't dress like this. We fashionable people. We gonna dress in something name brand, something very high fashion, not some cheap kente cloth and copper necklaces and this and that. That's all for like Hotep Afrocentric Pan African people. So when did this lady, known as Queen Quet, real name Marquetta L. Goodwin, start this coalition? She started the Gullah Geechee Nation, in which she calls it, in July 2nd, 2000. Here she is right here. We're gonna play it. Here she is right here. We could play a little clip of her talking about the Gullah Geechee Nation that she made. Goes on. It's not just about this moment. So you hear that strong New York accent? Yeah, right. But she's supposed to be a real Gullah Geechee from South Carolina, but got a New York accent. Be real. The Weeby announced there. Gullah is people blessed by God. Gullah means people blessed by God. We've already discussed where the word Gullah comes from. That's an indigenous word, and it does not mean that. And this comes from our ancestry, both of the Angolans. When did this lady, Queen Quet Marquetta L. Goodwin, start the Gullah Geechee Festival? Says she started her own version of the festival in 2005. And since then, I'll let you do the more research, but it seems to have co opted and done partnership with other Gullah Geechee festivals, which has incorporated her Afrocentric and Pan African views, as well as other people, because she isn't the only one, into those Gullah Geechee festivals. So we've already discussed what the original Gullah Geechee festival was about. It had nothing to do with Pan African. It had nothing to do with Pan Africanism. It's just a celebration of Memorial Day. Then you see more recently in the 2000s, the Gullah Geechee festival started to become a lot more Afrocentric or Pan African like around this time. Here's something that a lot of them like to say. I say it's a Yoruba word. They're supposed to be Angolans. She just said that they're Angolan people, but yet they're saying Asi. That's a Yoruba word from Nigeria. Are Gullah words, now let's get into the language. Are Gullah words African? This is just a quick Google search. They're gonna say yes. I'm gonna say no, and we're gonna get into why I say no. Now here you have, and I'm not gonna say nothing bad about her. Bless her heart, bless her soul. This is one of our elders, our queens, Carolyn White or Jubilee. And we love her, but we just gonna break down a little something.
Because of my ancestors. Yeah, very well done.
Now she has a lot of influence in the Gullah Geechee portion. I think in South Carolina, somewhere around South Carolina, where she does a lot of her work at.
Many years ago now, I kind of adopted a young lady. She was from Nigeria, and helped her to go to school. And so a lot of my costumes and things that I wear, she has made them for me. And so I really learned a lot.
So you see, she adopted a Nigerian girl who taught her these things, these Afrocentric, Pan African things that they're now co-opting into the Gullah Geechee festivals. She said she made her costumes. They wearing all these kente cloths and the African cloths now in the Gullah Geechee festivals. And she said that this is something that they've learned from the internet and from talking amongst Africans on the internet. And like she said, she adopted one. That's where she got this ideology. And we love this sister. I'm not saying nothing bad about her. She's one of the elders I respect.
My generation is really the last generation to have direct contact with Gullah speaking people, and Gullah was their only language.
Now you see, now what the Gullah Geechee language is not really what I would say a language. It's a dialect. It's a type of Creole. Like it's a mismatch. It's a mishmash of a bunch of different words. It's a mismatch of English words, maybe some African words, maybe indigenous words, and words that people just created up out of their ass over the past hundreds of years. Let's just be honest. You got all these different, you got English people, you got different African tribes coming from the slave trade from the Barbados to South Carolina, and then the ones from the Barbados coming up to South Carolina and mixing with them to a point to where they're just creating words. They don't understand each other. They're just creating words out of their ass. So no, it's not the Gullah Geechee language is not an African language. It's what I would consider an indigenous language because it was created here in America once the African slaves came here and began intermixing with natives and whites. It's created this mismatch of their own language. And we're about to prove that also once we get further in these videos.
So now I can share it with everybody else.
And bless this sister right here too. Bless her heart, one of our elders. Now she teaches the Gullah Geechee language or dialect. Most of the people that speak this are like going to be some of the older people, older generations. You're not going to really see too many younger people really speaking it heavy. Now they all got accents. They all got accents. I lived in different parts of Georgia around the coast, so a lot of the people, Gullah Geechee people, they got accents. They sound like they're Caribbean. I'm gonna get into why they sound like they're Caribbean because a long time ago, there's basically the same. It's basically the same governors and leadership as Barbados. A lot of slaves from Barbados and white people came up to South Carolina. That's why they have that Caribbean accent.
This generation and future generation who want to know how to speak it properly.
And here's his blessed sister, bless her soul. Here you see, now this is what I mean by, this is the Pan-Africanization of the Gullah Geechee people. They all dressed in kente cloths and African garb. Now, this is stuff that they're learning from the internet and from outside sources. This is not natural. As you can see in the previous slide, when I explained to you, the originator of the Gullah Geechee festival, Miss Pat, it had nothing to do with African culture.
Campbell, and this is your Beaufort County. How huna da do? Be glad for see huna. Be glad huna come for yeti why have to say. That's Gullah. The Gullah language is a mixture of English and African words.
And this brother here, very educated brother, but unfortunately, we're gonna push back and prove that it's not really African words. It's not an African language. Maybe a couple African words that are highly butchered, but no, it's not an African language.
So they had to come up with their own language. It's a blend of what they heard what's called the pale man speak. They picked up words here and there. They brought some of their words from Africa.
Now, this is for some of you people say, well, who are you? You're not from South Carolina. You're not from the coast. You can't talk.
So let me first say that I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, right?
Okay. Well, this woman is here teaching, and she's not from there either. So therefore, you close your damn mouth. I lived in different parts of Georgia and South Carolina, so at least I know a little bit.
South Carolina history.
Now, see, I told you everything about the Gullah Geechee festival and about their culture nowadays is Pan-Africanized. It's heavily Pan-Africanized. Now, this woman walking around with a kente cloth and a damn stick, a damn bamboo stick. Now, you've said in multiple videos that they're supposed to be Angolan, but the kente cloth is Ghanaian, if I'm not mistaken. It really didn't even come from there, but I'm not about to get into that. So, if these Gullah Geechee people are an African uncontacted tribe there on the islands, why are they just now getting so heavy into this Pan-African stuff now in the 2000s? And why are they saying words like Ase, which is from Nigeria, and wearing kente cloth, which is from Ghana, if they're supposed to be Angolans? I'm telling you, this stuff is a learned behavior. They're learning this stuff from the internet. This is being brought down from the top. They've been trying to Pan-Africanize Black Americans for like at least the last 20, 30 years. Probably 40, 50 years, really. I'm trying to tell you. Now let's get into where This is the originator where a lot of this stuff came from. This came from, and shout out to this brother, very good, educated, one of the historian. This is Lorenzo Dow Turner. He came out with a book called Africans in the Gullah dialect. Basically, he's the one that made the claim that the Gullah Geechee dialect is an African language, and which wasn't really true. And we're gonna get into why. Now, Lorenzo Dow Turner, best remembered for his Gullah studies. His interest in the Gullah people began in 1929. He first heard Gullah speakers while teaching in the summer class in South Carolina. Turner was strongly influenced by the African linguistics movement, which he joined at its inception. So basically what this means is that this brother, this was around the time when a lot of people was trying to connect their roots, trying to say that a lot of different African linguistics, trying to connect that to us here in America. So basically, when you have this type of ideology, you kind of hear what you want to hear, and when you hear certain words that might sound similar, you say, "Oh, that's that. That word comes from that," and that's basically what this was, and we're gonna prove that later on in these slides. Okay, so here you have it. This is a 2011 article from a Brazilian scholar, Eliseo M. Amos. This paper can be seen as an expectation exercised by the author for not having pursued the Gullah connections of the Black Seminoles in the book she co-edited in 1996. She certainly knew that the language that the Black Seminoles spoke was a Creole language, and she mentioned as much in a footnote in Chapter 11, but did not pursue the matter further. The research for this paper was developed along the following lines, looking for information if Porter, the premier Black Seminole historian, had an inkling of the Black Seminole/Gullah cultural connection, and if he had contacted Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner on the subject. Examining the language connections between Gullah and Afro-Seminole Creole, which is the official name of the Creole language spoken by the Black Seminoles. Examining the language connections between Gullah and Afro-Seminole Creole, which is the official name of the Creole language spoken by the Black Seminoles. Examining the language connections between Gullah and Afro-Seminole Creole, which is the official name of the Creole language spoken by the Black Seminoles. Examining Black Seminole naming practices to verify if the practices were common among South Carolina slaves, who were the ancestors of the Black Seminoles, had survived into the 19th and 20th century. A white woman who owned a ranch near the Black Seminole settlement of, I'm not going to try to pronounce this word, such and such Mexico. She told Porter that one of her employees, a Black Seminole man, indicated that he had learned the quote-unquote Negro Gullah from his grandmother. It is interesting to mention that here in the 1940s, the Black Seminoles still had in their memories the word Gullah to identify the language they spoke. 30 years later, that consciousness had disappeared. So all the way up into the 1940s, the Black Seminoles that was in Mexico, they still remember the word Gullah to identify their native tongue or their dialect. Porter's last brushes with the Gullah in relation to the Black Seminoles were in the 70s. Two linguistics came to Texas and Mexico to study the connections between the language spoken by the Black Seminoles and the Gullah, and they contacted Porter looking for information.
Really, what the Gullah Geechee language is an English-based Creole language. Really, what the Gullah Geechee language is an English-based Creole language. Really, what the Gullah Geechee language is an English-based Creole language. We can just drop one letter from a word and just change the sound altogether. We can just drop one letter from a word and just change the sound altogether. We can just drop one letter from a word and just change the sound altogether. We will probably.
Now, this is what I told you in the earlier slides. The Creole language or dialect is not an African language. She just said it's more like a Creole dialect. When they just drop the letter, they'll take an English word, drop one letter and add another. When I told you these were just a bunch of people who were mixing up a bunch of different words and creating different words out of their ass. It is not an African language. You can't go back to any part of Africa and hear these words being spoken if it's an African language. Now here she just said it out of her own mouth. It's a Creole dialect made from taking English words, dropping a letter and adding a word, basically creating their own words out of their ass to the points where only they can understand it.
They say, oh, we out here in the yard, okay? We wouldn't say that. We say, we're there in the yard. And you really have to know the language to know what we're saying. And that what really made.
And there you have it. That's why I told you the Gullah Geechee. Now there you have it. The Gullah Geechee Creole accent. It's a dialect. It is not an African language. And here you have it. Now, like I said earlier, we're going to get into the Gullah Geechee's people accent. It's not an African language. That I'm pretty sure if you got any brain cells, you heard that it sounds very Caribbean. And that is beside, and that the reason for that is because the Carolina and Barbados governor leadership people have a strong cultural connection. Barbados and South Carolina share a deep foundational connection dating back to the 17th century when Barbadian planters and leaders established the Carolinas as a colony of a colony. This connection deeply influenced early Carolina political, economic, and cultural structures. The Barbados providing many of the first governors, plantation models, and slave codes. So basically, the South Carolina people, especially along the coast, they get their whole culture, way of life, their accent, way of speech, everything from Barbados. That is why their accent sounds the way that it sounds. This is why they sound Caribbean. I remember when I used to live in a different part of Georgia, like not too far from the coast, my supervisor, she was Geechee, and she used to have that accent. Her name was Miss Joanne. Cool lady. Here's a book you can read as a source about the Barbados and Carolina connection. Here's another source that you all can read: Barbados and the Roots of Carolina. So this is where their accent or their dialect comes from. It comes from a bunch of different African tribes and indigenous tribes being mixed up all in the Caribbean islands, Barbados, coming to South Carolina, Charleston port area where other African slaves were, and they all just mismatching a bunch of different words, coming up with different words out of their ass, trying to communicate, and taking different English words, maybe some indigenous words, dropping a letter, adding a letter, and coming up with their own words. This is not an African language at all. Now you might hear some people say a lot. You hear people say, "Oh, we got our rice from Africa. Some of the African slaves, they brought the rice in their hair and planted it here." No, that's false. Where did Carolina rice come from? The historic premium grain is believed to have originated from Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, and arrived in the Carolinas around 1685 via storm-damaged ship from Madagascar. Dr. Henry Woodward planted this seed in South Carolina, establishing a massive rice industry reliant on the expertise of enslaved Africans. Now, yes, these enslaved Africans, they came over here. These were rice planters where they came from, so they knew how to cultivate this rice, but they did not bring the rice with them. And this is Dr. Henry Woodward, a white man who brought that rice grain over here and planted it. Charleston Low Country red rice is the same as jollof rice because that's where we come from. That's false. What makes jollof rice jollof rice? It comes from a blend of tomato, red bell peppers. That's how you get the color. You hear that? Tomatoes, red bell peppers. That's how they get the color, the jollof rice that comes from Africa. Does jollof rice get its red color? Blend of tomatoes and tomato paste. That's how the jollof rice gets its color. Where does tomatoes come from? Tomatoes come from South America, not Africa. Those of you who might say, well, the Gullah Geechee people get it from Africa and it's a African culture. They've been doing it for thousands of years. No, because the tomato comes from America. When did tomatoes get to West Africa? Tomatoes were introduced to West Africa as a part of the transatlantic exchange with a significant adoption and cultivation occurring in the early 19th century. So there you have it, people. Not saying that the Gullah Geechee people don't have any African ancestry. Yes, of course they do, but they are also very much so mixed with indigenous or Native American peoples and even some whites, just like all other Black Americans. And that this more recent talk about the Gullah Geechee people being some type of uncontacted, heavily African people is false. The Pan-Africanization of these people is recent. Very much so recent. This is something they're learning from the internet and people, the Pan-Africanization coming from the top. They've been trying to do this to Black Americans for the last 50 years. And I've just proven this. Thank you all. So now we'll be out, and until the next time.